Good evening. Today I'm testing out a 50mm lens for Sony's full-frame mirrorless cameras, the 50mm f1.8 FE. It's for their mirrorless cameras full-frame or APS-C, and it's the least expensive one that they market at £250, but only $200 in the US. Sony must really hate us over here in the UK, our prices are so inflated. Anyway, it's your classic fast 50mm lens. On full frame, that's a lovely versatile focal length, giving you a nice emphasis on your subject while still being wide enough to see the bigger picture. On an APS-C camera, it's the full frame equivalent focal length of 75mm, so that's a lot tighter, but still useful for general purpose photography and pretty good for portrait shots too. Although, if you use one of Sony's APS-C mirrorless cameras, you might prefer the similarly priced 50mm f1.8 OSS, which has image stabilization. This FE lens does not have image stabilization. It's made of plastic, and it's a little larger than you might expect to see on a mirrorless camera lens. Between the metallic lens mount and the rear optical element, there's quite a deep gap. It seems a bit like Sony might have simply designed a digital SLR lens and mounted it away from the sensor. I don't like that. It makes the lens bigger than it should be. Small mirrorless cameras should have small lenses designed for them. It's pretty lightweight though, coming in at only 160 grams. The filter size is pretty small too, being only 49mm. Its only control ring is the focus ring, which turns very smoothly. It's electronically coupled to the focus motor. Its autofocus system is poor. It makes a little noise and it's pretty slow and has a tendency to focus hunt quite often, especially in dark conditions. That's a real weak point in the lens. The autofocus system is surprisingly poor. Well, let's see about image quality. We'll test it on a Sony a7R II camera with its demanding 42MP full-frame sensor. In the middle of the image at f1.8, the image is nice and sharp, although not quite bitingly sharp, and contrast is just okay. Image quality in the corners isn't too bad though. There's some ghosting and poor contrast there, but the base image remains nice and sharp. If you stop down to f2.8, the contrast in the corners becomes far clearer. Image quality back in the middle becomes fantastic. At f4, it's pretty much perfect in the middle, and the corners are sharp now. Stop down to f5.6 and f8 for really fantastic corner sharpness. Stop down to f11 or further, and you'll start to see a softer image due to the effect of diffraction. Overall, this little lens performs pretty well, considering we're testing it on a 42MP sensor. As you'd expect for a fast 50mm lens, it needs some stopping down to get very sharp corners, but when you do, they become very impressive. And now, let's test it on an APS-C camera, my little Sony a6300 with its 24MP sensor. In the middle of the image at f1.8, sharpness remains very good, although some purple fringing is evident here. Image quality in the corners is a little softer. At f2.8, sharpness is about the same there, although the image in the middle is much punchier now. It remains great at f4, and the corners are a touch better now. At f5.6, they're a touch better again. If you stop down further to f8 or f11 though, the image will begin to soften due to the effect of diffraction. So on an APS-C camera, the lens performs okay enough. Its sweet spot is at f5.6. Let's see about distortion and vignetting on a full-frame camera now. These pictures were taken in RAW format to get around Sony's automatic corrections. The good news is that the lens doesn't project much distortion at all. Vignetting is pretty noticeable at f1.8 though. Stop down to f2.8 or f4 to see it much reduced. How about close-up image quality? It can focus as closely as 45cm. That's average for a fast 50mm lens. At f1.8, image quality is a touch soft at close distances. However, it's pretty sharp at f2.8 and at f4, which is good to see. Let's see now how it works against bright lights. We see some quite pronounced flaring and some purple haziness across the image frame so nothing to write home about here. And finally, Bokeh. Naturally, as a fast 50mm lens, it can give you some nice background separation at wide apertures. I found its bokeh to be just a little smoother than usual for this kind of 50mm lens. There are no real problems, but those backgrounds are not amazingly smooth either. Well, the Sony 50mm f1.8 FE is a pretty typical, inexpensive, fast 50mm lens in lots of ways. I was unimpressed with its size and its weak autofocus system and certain aspects of its optical performance. But I was pleased with its sharper than usual optics and its reasonably smooth bokeh. Its price in the US is fairly good value, although the same can't quite be said for its UK price. If you're looking for a general purpose lens for your full frame Sony camera and you're on a budget, then this new Sony lens is a very nice option.